The Korean Mafia boss's twin daughters could not sleep until a black foreign maid changed everything. On February 10th, 2023, in the coastal city of Tongyeong, South Korea, an entire household remained awake for 120 consecutive nights, marked by the non-stop cries of twin infants who had just lost their mother. Nothing seemed capable of restoring peace to that fractured home. But that very night, something unexpected occurred. When a foreign young woman no one knew held one of the babies, the crying stopped instantly, as if the house itself had exhaled in disbelief. From that moment on, fate began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. What truly happened that night, and why did those two small lives respond only to her? Follow the channel, like the video, and comment where you are watching from so we can experience this story together. The rain fell like tears against the window of the small boarding house in Tongyeong, each drop carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers. Miriam Caldwell pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the coastal city sleep under a blanket of darkness, and wondered if running away from home meant she could ever truly arrive anywhere else. 28 years old, alone in a country whose language still twisted her tongue into knots, she had learned that silence could be both a refuge and a prison. Tonight, it was neither. Tonight, silence was merely the prelude to something she couldn't yet name. The letter in her pocket felt heavier than it should. 3 sentences, a job offer, an address that led to the kind of house people whispered about in convenience stores and late-night taxi rides. Seo Guanho's mansion sat on the hillside like a sleeping beast, all stone and glass and secrets that the wind carried down to the fishing docks below. Everyone in Tongyeong knew his name. Most were too afraid to say it out loud. Miriam folded the letter carefully, her dark fingers trembling slightly as she tucked it back into her worn coat. Tomorrow morning, she would walk up that hill. Tomorrow morning, she would meet the man whose grief, according to the housekeeping agency, had turned his home into a place where peace came to pass away. But tonight, she allowed herself one more moment of doubt, one more moment to remember why she had crossed an ocean to escape the suffocating kindness of people who looked at her with pity, who touched her arm and said things like, "Time heals," and "You'll find your purpose again," as if loss was a math problem with a solution hidden somewhere, in the margins. She knew better. Some wounds don't close. They simply become part of the landscape, of who you are. The morning came too quickly. Dressed in the pale gray light that Tongyeong wore like a widow's veil, Miriam walked up the hill slowly, her second-hand shoes clicking against wet pavement, each step carrying her further from the safety of anonymity and closer to something that felt dangerously like hope. The mansion revealed itself gradually through the morning mist. First the iron gates, then the stone walls covered in perfectly manicured ivy, finally the house itself, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the clouds back at the sky. It was beautiful in the way expensive things often are, cold, untouchable, designed to impress rather than welcome. A woman in her 50s met her at the service entrance, her face arranged in the practiced neutrality of someone who had worked in wealthy households long enough to know that showing emotion was a luxury reserved for people who didn't need their paychecks. Mrs. Kang, the head housekeeper, looked Miriam up and down with the efficiency of someone checking produce at the market. "You're the new one," she said, in careful English, each word measured. "Foreign workers don't usually last long here." "The babies," she trailed off, and in that pause, Miriam heard something that made her stomach tighten. Not warning, not judgment, fear. "The babies cry," Mrs. Kang continued, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "They cry and cry and cry, and nothing makes them stop. Not medicine, not music, not prayers. 5 months now since their mother." Another pause, heavier than the first. "Since they lost her. Mr. Seo, he tries everything. But those little girls, they remember. Somehow they remember." Miriam wanted to ask what exactly the babies remembered, but Mrs. Kang was already moving, leading her through a maze of corridors that smelled of expensive cleaning products and something else. Something sad and stale, like flowers left too long in a vase. The house was immaculate. Every surface gleamed. Every painting hung at precisely the right angle. But there was something performative about the perfection, as if the entire mansion was holding its breath, waiting for permission to exhale. They passed a room with double doors, slightly ajar. Miriam caught a glimpse of a man standing at a window, his back rigid, his hands clasped behind him in a posture that suggested military training, or simply the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had forgotten how to relax. Seo Guanho. Even from behind, even through a crack in the door, his presence filled the space like pressure before a storm. Mrs. Kang pulled her away quickly. "You'll meet him later. First your room, your duties, the rules." The rules were extensive and delivered with the seriousness of biblical commandments. Don't enter the East Wing without permission. Don't ask questions about Mr. Seo's business associates. Don't discuss the household with anyone outside these walls. And above all, above everything, don't form attachments to the children. "You're here to work," Mrs. Kang said, her eyes suddenly sharp. "Not to play pretend family." The words hit Miriam harder than they should have, finding soft places she thought she'd armored over. She simply nodded, because what else could she do? Her room was small but clean, tucked in the servants' wing with a window that looked out over the garden. Miriam set down her single suitcase. Everything she owned in the world fit into one bag now, and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the house settle around her. That's when she heard it. A sound so broken, so utterly devastated, that it seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the nursery 2 floors above. A baby's cry, yes, but layered with something else. Grief. Pure, distilled, impossible grief that no 5-month-old should be capable of expressing. Then a second voice joined the first, slightly different in pitch but identical in its inconsolable anguish. The twins, Yaren and Yuna, crying in perfect, terrible harmony. Miriam's hands moved to her chest involuntarily, pressing against her own heart as if she could physically hold it in place. She knew that sound. She knew what it meant to cry for someone who would never come back, to call out in the darkness for arms that would never hold you again. She knew it because she had made that sound herself, once, in a different life. The crying continued for hours, through lunch, through the afternoon, through dinner that Miriam ate alone in the kitchen, while other staff members moved around her like water around a stone. Not unfriendly, but not welcoming either. The foreign girl, the new one, the one who wouldn't last. Night fell heavy and absolute. Miriam lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the baby's cries echo through the expensive walls like ghosts trying to find their way home. She thought about her own mother, who had pressed a rosary into her hands before she left and said, "Sometimes God sends us to places we don't understand, to do work we can't yet see. Trust the path, baby girl, even when it makes no sense, especially when it makes no sense." At exactly 2:47 a.m., she would remember the time later, would replay this moment in her mind 1,000 times. Miriam heard footsteps in the corridor outside her room, heavy, uneven, exhausted, then voices, urgent and worried. She opened her door to find the hallway flooded with light and movement. Staff members rushing past, their faces creased with concern. Mrs. Kang directing traffic like a general in a losing battle. And at the center of it all, emerging from the nursery with a baby in his arms, was Seo Guanho. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of face that would be handsome if it wasn't currently carved from pure exhaustion. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight with frustration, hair disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. He was rocking little Yaren. Miriam somehow knew it was Yaren, could feel it, but the baby's cries only intensified, her tiny face red and wet with tears that seemed endless. "Sir, please, let me try," one of the staff members began, but Guanho just shook his head, that simple gesture carrying so much defeat it was physically painful to witness. His eyes swept the corridor, landing on faces he knew, faces that had tried and failed to soothe his daughters for 5 months. Then, for reasons Miriam would never fully understand, his gaze stopped on her. She stood in her doorway in an old t-shirt and sleep pants, her natural hair wrapped in a silk scarf, looking nothing like someone who belonged in this pristine, expensive world. She should have felt self-conscious. Instead, she felt pulled forward by something that had no name in any language she spoke. Guanho walked toward her slowly, each step deliberate. The entire hallway fell silent, even the baby seeming to pause in her crying to take a breath. When he reached Miriam, he stopped, studying her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. "You're new," he said in English that was surprisingly fluent. "Mrs. Kang hired you." "Yes, sir." "Have you ever cared for children?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with more weight than simple inquiry. Miriam thought about lying, about saying yes to make herself seem qualified. Instead, she found herself saying, "I've cared for people I loved. I've held them when they cried. I've whispered prayers over them when prayers were all I had left to give." Something shifted in Guanho's expression. Not softening exactly, more like recognition, like meeting someone who speaks your native language in a foreign country. "Then perhaps," he began. And before Miriam fully understood what was happening, he was placing Yaren in her arms. The baby was warm and solid and impossibly light all at once. Miriam's body remembered how to hold a child before her mind caught up, her arms automatically adjusting to support the small head, her hand naturally finding the gentle rocking rhythm that had once been as familiar as breathing. Yaren's cries continued for exactly 3 more seconds. Then, silence. Not the silence of sleep or resignation. This was different. This was the silence of someone who had been lost, finally hearing their name called. Yaren's tiny body relaxed against Miriam's chest, her breathing evening out, her little fists unclenching from their perpetual state of distress. The hallway exploded into whispers. Staff members stared openly. Mrs. Kang's mouth fell open in undisguised shock. And Guanho looked like someone who had just witnessed a miracle he didn't believe in, but desperately wanted to. "How?" he breathed, but couldn't finish the sentence. Miriam didn't have an answer. She simply stood there, holding this child who was not hers, feeling something crack open in her chest, something she thought she'd sealed shut forever when she buried her own dreams in the red Georgia clay and bought a one-way ticket to the other side of the world. Yaren's eyes drifted closed, her breathing deep and steady now. Peaceful. Actually, peaceful. For the first time in 5 months, silence filled Seo Guanho's house. It lasted exactly 47 seconds. Then one of the household staff, a younger man Miriam hadn't met yet, came running down the hallway, his face pale, his hands shaking as he grabbed Guanho's arm with a familiarity that suggested he was more than just regular staff. "Sir," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "Sir, you need to come to the nursery. Right now." "What is it?" Guanho's voice shifted instantly from exhausted father to something harder, more alert. The young man glanced at Miriam, at the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at his employer. When he spoke again, his voice dropped to barely a whisper, but in the absolute silence of that hallway, every word carried clear as a bell. "We found something in the nursery, something that shouldn't be there. The medicine cabinet. Someone's been moving things around. And sir," he paused, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard, "the infant supplements. The ones Dr. Min prescribed last week. Some of the bottles are open, tampered with. We don't understand how or why or when, but something is very, very wrong in that room." The nursery looked like a crime scene bathed in soft pink light. Miriam stood in the doorway, still holding Yaren against her chest, watching as staff members moved through the room with surgical precision, their faces masks of controlled panic. The walls were painted in gentle pastels, clouds and stars and cartoon rabbits that seemed obscenely cheerful, given the tension crackling through the air like static electricity before a storm. Guanho stood at the center of it all, his entire body rigid as Mrs. Kang pointed to the medicine cabinet mounted on the far wall. The small white door hung open, revealing neat rows of bottles and packages, each labeled in careful Korean script. But something about the arrangement was wrong. Even Miriam, who couldn't read the labels, could sense the disruption, like walking into a familiar room and knowing someone had moved the furniture, even if you couldn't immediately identify what. "The supplements," Mrs. Kang said, her voice shaking slightly despite her obvious attempts to maintain professional composure. "The iron drops Dr. Min prescribed last Tuesday, the vitamin D gel capsules, the probiotic powder. They were all sealed when we organized this cabinet 3 days ago. I checked them myself before placing them here. Every single bottle was unopened." She reached out with trembling fingers, carefully lifting one of the small brown bottles. The safety seal around the cap was broken, hanging loose like a torn promise. "Now this," she continued, her knuckles white around the bottle. "And this one. And these 3 in the back. All opened. Some of them reorganized in the wrong order. The dates don't match our inventory system anymore. Someone has been in this cabinet. Someone has been touching these medications." The words hung in the air like poison gas. invisible but suffocating. Miriam felt Yaren shift against her shoulder, the baby making small sounds in her sleep, completely unaware that her nursery had transformed into a stage for something dark and inexplicable. Guanho's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "When was the last time anyone accessed this cabinet?" "Yesterday morning," one of the night staff members answered. A woman in her 30s with kind eyes that now reflected pure fear. "I gave Yuna her vitamin drops at 9 a.m., exactly as prescribed. The bottle was sealed. I had to break the safety tab myself. I remember because I struggled with it for a few seconds. And after that, the cabinet was locked. Only Mrs. Kang, myself, and Dr. Min have keys." She pulled a small silver key from her pocket, holding it up as if offering evidence of her innocence. "Mine hasn't left my person. Not once." Mrs. Kang produced her own key from the chain around her neck. "Neither has mine," which left one person unaccounted for. As if summoned by the collective thought, footsteps echoed in the hallway, sharp and purposeful. Dr. Min Seolhwa entered the nursery with the confident stride of someone who belonged there, her white medical coat pristine, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that accentuated her sharp cheekbones. She was beautiful in the way that intimidating people often are, all clean lines and calculated movements, nothing soft or yielding about her presence. "I received your urgent message," she said, her eyes scanning the room before landing on Guanho. "What's the emergency?" There was something in her tone that made Miriam's skin prickle. Not concern, exactly. More like curiosity mixed with something else. Something that tasted like anticipation. Guanho gestured to the open cabinet. "The medications have been tampered with." Seolhwa's eyebrows rose in perfectly choreographed surprise. She moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with metronomic precision. "Tampered with? That's impossible. I was here myself just yesterday afternoon to check on the girls. Everything was perfectly in order." "Yesterday afternoon?" Mrs. Kang's voice carried a note of confusion. "But Dr. Min, you weren't scheduled for a visit yesterday. Your next appointment is tomorrow." The doctor's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Quick as a blink, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Miriam was paying attention. Years of learning to read the spaces between words, of surviving in rooms where she wasn't quite welcome, had taught her to notice the micro-adjustments people made when caught off guard. "I stopped by to drop off some updated dosage instructions," Seolhwa said smoothly, already moving past the awkward moment. "I left them on your desk, Mrs. Kang. Perhaps you haven't seen them yet." Mrs. Kang's mouth opened, then closed. She looked uncertain, as if trying to remember something that might or might not have happened. Seolhwa turned her attention to the medicine cabinet, reaching for one of the opened bottles. "May I?" Guanho nodded, and the doctor examined the bottle with professional detachment, turning it over in her long fingers, checking the label, unscrewing the cap to peer inside. "The contents appear intact," she said after a moment. "No visible contamination, no unusual odor. But obviously we should dispose of anything that's been compromised and order fresh supplies immediately." "That's not the point," Guanho said quietly, but there was steel underneath the softness. "The point is that someone opened these. Someone was in here, handling my daughter's medications, and we don't know who or why. Perhaps one of the night staff needed to access something and forgot to mention it," Seolhwa suggested, her tone reasonable, almost condescending. "These things happen in busy households. Simple miscommunication. But there was nothing simple about the way she said it. Nothing simple about the casual dismissal of genuine concern." Miriam watched as the doctor's gaze swept across the assembled staff members, lingering for just a fraction too long on the newer faces, the ones who might not have built up complete trust yet. The ones like Miriam. "Or perhaps," Seolhwa continued, her voice taking on a contemplative quality that made Miriam's stomach tighten, "we should consider that someone new to the household might have been curious, might have looked inside the cabinet without understanding the protocols. Not with malicious intent, of course, just unfamiliarity with how things work here." The implication landed like a slap. Several pairs of eyes turned toward Miriam, curiosity and suspicion mixing in equal measure. She felt her arms instinctively tighten around Yaren, protective even as she became the protected's potential threat. "Ms. Caldwell arrived only yesterday," Guanho said, his voice neutral but his eyes sharp as broken glass. "She hasn't been in this room unsupervised." "Of course," Seolhwa agreed quickly. Too quickly. "I'm merely suggesting we expand our investigation to include all possibilities. For the children's safety." For the children's safety. The words were a shield, unassailable in their righteousness. Who could argue against protecting babies? Who would dare suggest that maybe, just maybe, the person raising concerns was the one they should be concerned about? Miriam wanted to speak, to defend herself against accusations that hadn't quite been made, but hung in the air nonetheless. But she had learned long ago that sometimes speaking only confirmed people's worst assumptions. Sometimes silence was the only language that couldn't be twisted against you. Yerin stirred in her arms, making soft noises that threatened to become cries. Instinctively, Miriam began to rock gently, humming something wordless and low, a melody her own mother had once hummed to her in moments of distress. The baby settled immediately, her small body relaxing back into sleep. Guanho noticed. Of course he noticed. His expression shifted microscopically, some of the hardness leaving his features as he watched his daughter find peace in a stranger's arms. "We'll review the security footage," he said finally, addressing the room. "Every camera in this wing for the past 72 hours. Mrs. Kang, please coordinate with the security team. Dr. Min, I'll need a complete inventory of every medication in this cabinet, cross-referenced with your prescriptions. If anything is missing or altered, I want to know immediately." "Of course," Seolhwa said, but her eyes were on Miriam now, steady and assessing. "Though I should mention, the cameras in the nursery corridor have been experiencing technical difficulties lately. Brief outages. Nothing serious, but there may be gaps in the footage." "How convenient," Mrs. Kang muttered, then seemed to regret speaking aloud. The meeting dissolved into assignments and logistics, people moving with renewed purpose now that they had concrete tasks to complete. Miriam remained in the doorway, an island in the stream of activity, still holding Yerin, still feeling the weight of unspoken accusations pressing against her skin like humidity before rain. As the room emptied, Dr. Min Seolhwa paused beside her. Up close, the woman smelled of expensive perfume and antiseptic, a combination that made Miriam think of hospitals and endings. "She likes you," Seolhwa said, nodding toward the sleeping baby. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's unusual. Yerin doesn't typically respond well to new people. I'm just holding her," Miriam replied quietly. The doctor's gaze traveled from Yerin's peaceful face up to Miriam's. "You must have a gift, a very special gift. I hope it's genuine." The words could have been a compliment. Could have been. Seolhwa walked away, her heels clicking a rhythm that sounded almost like a countdown. Miriam watched her go, watched the deliberate straightness of her spine, the controlled swing of her arms. Everything about the woman was measured, calculated, performed. Everything except that brief flicker of something in her eyes when Mrs. Kang had questioned her unscheduled visit. Night had fallen completely by the time Miriam finally carried Yerin back to the nursery crib. Yuna was already asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of infant dreams. Miriam placed Yerin beside her sister with infinite care, holding her breath as she waited to see if the baby would wake, would cry, would shatter the fragile peace they'd somehow achieved. But Yerin simply sighed, a sound so small and content it made Miriam's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. The twins lay together, mirror images, their identical faces serene in sleep. For the first time since their mother's passing, they rested without tears. Miriam turned to leave, her heart strangely full and hollow at the same time, when she noticed something on the changing table, a small piece of paper, folded once, sitting beside the stack of clean diapers. She almost ignored it, almost walked past, but something made her pick it up. The handwriting was precise, each letter formed with medical perfection. Some angels come with broken wings. Make sure yours don't break anyone else. No signature, no context, just those words, loaded with meaning Miriam couldn't quite decode but felt in her bones nonetheless. She looked up, her eyes finding the security camera mounted in the corner of the room. The small red light that should have been blinking was dark, lifeless. Whether it was truly malfunctioning or had been deliberately disabled, she couldn't tell. But standing there in the nursery, holding that cryptic note, watching two innocent babies sleep peacefully for the first time in months, Miriam felt something cold settle in her stomach. This house had secrets, This house had shadows that moved when they shouldn't, and somehow, without meaning to, without wanting to, she had stepped directly into their path. From the hallway came the sound of a door closing softly, then footsteps, deliberate and measured, walking away into the expensive darkness of Seo Guanho's mansion. Morning arrived in Tongyang, wrapped in fog so thick it turned the mansion into an island floating in white nothingness. Miriam woke to the sound of voices drifting through her door, urgent, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever footsteps approached. The kind of talk that happens when people are trying to solve a problem they don't want others to overhear. She dressed quickly in the simple uniform Mrs. Kang had provided. Black pants, white blouse, an apron that felt like a costume she hadn't auditioned for. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman who looked more tired than she felt. Dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. Physical exhaustion she could handle. It was the emotional weight that threatened to crush her. This strange, unexpected hope that had bloomed in her chest when Yaren stopped crying in her arms. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you believe in things that could be taken away. The breakfast room was unusually crowded when she arrived. Staff members clustered around the long wooden table, their faces drawn and worried, speaking in rapid Korean that Miriam's limited vocabulary couldn't follow. But she understood the tone. Fear had a universal language. Mrs. Kang noticed her and gestured for her to sit, sliding a bowl of rice porridge across the table. "Eat quickly," she said in English, her voice carrying none of its usual authority. "Mr. Seo wants to speak with you after breakfast." The words should have filled Miriam with anxiety, but instead she felt oddly calm. Whatever was coming, she'd face it. She'd faced worse things than wealthy men in expensive houses. Except when Seo Guanho finally appeared in the doorway of his study and invited her inside, Miriam realized she'd been wrong. She hadn't faced this before. Not exactly. The study was beautiful in a way that made her feel small. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages, a massive desk carved from dark wood that looked older than the house itself, windows that offered a view of the coast where morning light was just beginning to burn through the fog. Guanho stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, looking out at the water like a captain searching for land that might not exist. "Close the door, please," he said without turning around. She did, her heart beating steadily in her chest. Not fast, not panicked, just present, reminding her that she was alive and this moment was real. When he finally turned to face her, Miriam saw something in his expression that caught her off guard. Not suspicion or anger. Exhaustion mixed with something that looked dangerously close to hope. The same hope she'd been trying to suppress in herself. "The security footage has been reviewed," he said, his English formal but clear. "Every accessible camera in the East Wing for the past week. You appear in none of them except the hallway outside your room and the main corridor last night. You never entered the nursery unsupervised. You never approached the medicine cabinet." Relief should have flooded through her. Instead, Miriam felt only a quiet acknowledgement, like a judge reading a verdict she'd already known was coming. "I wouldn't have," she said simply. "I know." He moved closer, and she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. "I know, because I've spent the last 12 hours learning everything I can about you, Ms. Caldwell. Your employment history, your references from the agency, your background check, your reason for coming to Korea." The last part made her tense slightly. Her reason for coming to Korea was something she'd buried deep, wrapped in layers of silence and determination to never speak about it again. "I'm not here to judge your past," Guanho continued, his voice gentling. "I'm here to offer you a position, a real one, not as general household staff, but as the primary caregiver for my daughters." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Miriam wasn't sure she could carry. "Sir, I'm not qualified. You made them stop crying." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Miriam saw the facade slip for just a moment, revealing the grieving father underneath the powerful exterior. "For 5 months, Miss Caldwell, my daughters have cried every night, every single night. Medical specialists, sleep consultants, traditional Korean healers, priests. I've brought everyone, tried everything. Nothing worked. Nothing even came close. Until you." He moved to his desk, pulling out a folder that he set down carefully, as if it contained something precious and breakable. "This is a contract. Your salary would be substantial. Your own suite in the main house, not the staff quarters. Full benefits. including legal support for your visa extension. You'd have autonomy over the children's daily schedule, their routines, their care. I'm not asking you to be a servant. I'm asking you to be their caregiver. He paused, searching for the right word. Their guardian angel. Miriam's hands trembled slightly as she looked at the folder without opening it. This was everything she'd been afraid to want. Security, purpose, a place that might become home. And yet the cryptic note from last night whispered in the back of her mind. Some angels come with broken wings. Why me? She asked quietly. You don't know me. Not really. A background check doesn't show who someone is inside. Guanho was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond her shoulder. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. My wife used to say that grief recognizes grief, that pain speaks a language that transcends words. I didn't understand what she meant until after she was gone, but I understand now. He looked directly at Miriam, and she felt exposed in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. Seen. You've lost something too. Something that changed the shape of your soul. My daughters can sense that. They know you understand their sadness because you carry your own. The accuracy of his observation stole her breath. For a moment, she couldn't speak, could only stand there feeling the old wound in her chest pulse with remembered pain. The baby she'd lost at 7 months. The marriage that crumbled under the weight of grief. The life she'd buried in Georgia, before running to the other side of the world to escape the ghost of who she used to be. I'll take the position, she heard herself say, the words coming from someplace deeper than conscious thought. But I need you to know, I'm not perfect. I'm not some miracle worker. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to hurt. Perfect is the last thing my daughters need, Guanho replied, and for the first time since she'd met him, something like a smile ghosted across his features. They need real. They need present. They need someone who won't give up when things get difficult. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Miriam took it. His grip was firm, warm, the handshake of someone sealing a genuine agreement rather than a mere business transaction. Welcome to our family, Ms. Caldwell. The words should have felt presumptuous. Instead, they felt like a door opening in a house she'd thought was locked forever. The rest of the day passed in a blur of logistics. Mrs. Kang showing her the new suite, a beautiful room with attached bathroom and a small sitting area, far nicer than anywhere Miriam had lived in years. Staff members congratulating her with varying degrees of sincerity. And through it all, the babies, Yaren and Yuna, watching her with their enormous dark eyes, as if they too understood that something fundamental had shifted in their small universe. That evening, as Miriam prepared them for bed, she felt the weight of her new responsibility settle around her shoulders like a cloak. These children, these precious, broken-hearted children, were now hers to protect, hers to comfort, hers to help heal, if healing was even possible. Yuna reached up with one tiny hand, wrapping her fingers around Miriam's thumb with surprising strength. The gesture was so simple, so trusting, that Miriam felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, humming softly as she had the night before, watching as both babies' eyes grew heavy with sleep. This was good. This was right. This was the purpose she'd been searching for without knowing she was searching. But later, much later, when the mansion had settled into its uneasy sleep and Miriam finally retreated to her new room, she found something waiting for her on the nightstand. A small box, unmarked. She hadn't placed it there, hadn't seen anyone enter her room. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing the same infant supplement bottles from the nursery cabinet, the ones that had been tampered with, the ones that had started this entire investigation, and tucked beneath them, another note in that same precise handwriting. Angels should know where they fly. Not all ceilings are made of glass. Some are made of lies. Miriam's breath caught in her throat as footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her door. Slow, deliberate, stopping just on the other side. She waited, frozen, for a knock that never came. Instead, after an eternity compressed into 30 seconds, the footsteps retreated, fading into the expensive silence of the mansion. She looked down at the box in her hands, at the bottles that shouldn't be there, at the note that felt like both a warning and a threat. And for the first time since arriving in Korea, Miriam felt truly afraid. Not of the unknown, but of the possibility that she'd just accepted a position in a house where someone wanted her to fail. where someone was already building a case against her using evidence she couldn't refute because she didn't understand the game being played. The twins slept peacefully in the next room, their breathing audible through the baby monitor on her dresser. Soft, steady, trusting. They trusted her. Guan-ho trusted her. She'd finally found a place where she might belong, and someone was already working to take it away. The box sat on Miriam's dresser like an accusation made flesh, its presence poisoning the air of her new room. She'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling, trying to understand who would do this and why. By the time dawn broke over Tongyang, painting the sky in shades of gray and reluctant gold, she'd made a decision. She would show Guan-ho the box, immediately, before whoever planted it could weaponize it against her. But when she emerged from her room at 6 a.m., box tucked under her arm, the mansion was already awake in ways that felt wrong. Voices carried through the hallways, sharp, worried, angry. Staff members moved past her with faces that wouldn't meet her eyes, their body language screaming discomfort and judgment in equal measure. Mrs. Kang appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression carved from stone. "Ms. Caldwell, Mr. SEO is in the nursery. You should come, now." The walk down the corridor felt like a death march. Each step carried weight Miriam couldn't name but felt in her bones. When they reached the nursery, she found it crowded with people, household staff, security personnel, and at the center of it all, Dr. Min Seolwa, holding Yuna with exaggerated gentleness while speaking to Guan-ho in rapid Korean. The moment Miriam entered, every conversation stopped. The silence was suffocating, heavy with unspoken accusations that pressed against her skin like physical pressure. Guan-ho turned slowly, his face carefully neutral, but his eyes carrying something that made Miriam's stomach drop. Doubt. The first seeds of doubt, taking root in soil that had been prepared by someone else's careful cultivation. "Ms. Caldwell," he said, his voice formal in a way it hadn't been yesterday. "Dr. Min has informed me that Yuna had an adverse reaction during the night. Nothing serious, thankfully, but concerning nonetheless. Elevated temperature, unusual fussiness, minor digestive distress." Miriam's throat went dry. "I checked on both girls every 2 hours. Yuna was fine at 4 a.m. Perfect, actually. Sleeping peacefully. And yet, by 5:30, when Dr. Min arrived for her scheduled early checkup, the child was clearly unwell." Seolhwa's voice was smooth, clinical, carrying just the right note of professional concern. She adjusted Yuna in her arms, the baby looking perfectly healthy now but slightly drowsy. "These symptoms are consistent with incorrect dosing of supplements, or perhaps interaction with something that shouldn't have been administered." The implication landed like a physical blow. Miriam felt the room shift around her, felt eyes boring into her back, judging, convicting. "I didn't give the babies anything except their scheduled formula," Miriam said, hating how defensive she sounded. "Nothing else. I followed the chart Mrs. Kang provided exactly." "Of course," Seolhwa agreed, but her tone suggested the opposite. "Though I should mention, when I arrived this morning, I noticed the medication cabinet was unlocked, the same cabinet that had been tampered with before. And Ms. Caldwell, you now have a key, don't you? As primary caregiver?" Miriam's hand instinctively went to her pocket, where the key Mrs. Kang had given her yesterday still rested, a key that gave her access, a key that made her responsible. "I haven't used it," she said quietly. "I haven't opened that cabinet. The security footage from last night shows a gap," one of the security staff members interjected, his Korean-accented English careful but clear. From 2:15 a.m. to 2:47 a.m., the nursery corridor camera was offline. Technical malfunction, we believe, but during that window, someone could have entered without being recorded. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Miriam could see it now, could see how perfectly the pieces had been arranged. The mysterious gaps in footage, the cabinet found unlocked, the baby with convenient symptoms that appeared and disappeared, and at the center of it all, the new foreign caregiver who'd arrived just days before everything started going wrong. "May I see what you're holding?" Guan-ho's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He was looking at the box still tucked under her arm. Miriam's hands shook as she held it out, watching his expression shift as he opened it and found the supplement bottles inside. The same bottles that had been missing from the inventory. The same bottles that should never have been in her possession. "I found these in my room last night," she said quickly, words tumbling over themselves. "Someone put them there. I was coming to tell you this morning, I swear. I don't know how they got there or who." Of course someone put them there, Seolhwa interrupted gently, her voice dripping with false sympathy. The question is whether you're telling the truth about not knowing, or if this is a convenient story to explain away evidence. Evidence of what? Miriam's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. What exactly am I being accused of? The silence that followed was answer enough. No one wanted to say it directly, but the accusation hung in the air like smoke, that she had somehow harmed or intended to harm the children she'd been hired to protect. Gwanho set the box down carefully, his movements controlled in that way people move when they're fighting to maintain composure. Ms. Caldwell, I want to believe you, but you must understand how this looks. The timing, the evidence, the fact that my daughter became ill under your care. Your daughter is fine now, though, isn't she? Miriam heard herself say, desperation making her bold. If I had given her something wrong, wouldn't she still be sick? Wouldn't the symptoms be worse, not better? It was a good point, and she saw several staff members exchange glances, reconsidering. But Seolhwa was faster, already prepared with a response that sounded entirely too rehearsed. Actually, the symptoms, Ms. Caldwell describes are consistent with a very mild overdose of iron supplements, the doctor said, her tone taking on a lecturing quality. Enough to cause temporary distress, but not enough to cause lasting harm. Almost as if someone with limited medical knowledge made an honest mistake. Or, she paused dramatically, as if someone with more knowledge wanted to test how far they could go without causing real damage. The words were carefully chosen, perfectly calibrated to sound reasonable while being absolutely devastating. Miriam felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, felt the fragile trust she'd built with Gwanho crumbling like sand. I think, Seolhwa continued, adjusting Yuna with practiced ease, it might be wise for me to assume primary medical oversight for the girls for the next few days, just as a precaution. Ms. Caldwell can continue her other duties, of course, but perhaps with more supervision. The demotion was delivered so smoothly it almost didn't sound like one. Almost. Miriam watched as Gwanho's face worked through emotions too complex to name. He looked at her, then at his daughter in Seolhwa's arms, then back at her. The calculation happening behind his eyes was visible, painful to witness. That seems reasonable, he said finally, and Miriam felt something break inside her chest. Until we fully understand what happened. Dr. Min will supervise all medical care and medication. Ms. Caldwell, you'll focus on basic caregiving, feeding, changing, playtime, but always with another staff member present. You don't trust me. The words came out flat, emotionless, because if Miriam let herself feel what she was actually feeling, she'd shatter right there in the nursery. I don't know what to trust right now, Gwanho admitted, and the honesty in his voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. I'm trying to protect my children. Surely you can understand that. She could. God help her. She could understand it perfectly. If she were in his position, if she had children who'd already lost their mother, if strange things kept happening around someone new, wouldn't she be suspicious too? But understanding didn't make it hurt less. The meeting dissolved with instructions and schedules and protocols that essentially meant Miriam was being watched every second of every day. Staff members who'd been warming to her now kept their distance, their expressions carefully blank. Mrs. Kang gave her assignments with clipped efficiency, no warmth in her voice anymore. By afternoon, the entire household had reorganized itself around Miriam's suspected guilt, and she found herself more isolated than she'd been her first day in Korea. She was folding laundry in the service room, a task well below her official position, but one she'd been assigned nonetheless, when she heard voices in the hallway. 2 staff members, speaking in Korean, but using enough English words that Miriam could piece together the conversation. Foreign worker, suspicious from the start. Poor Mr. Seo finally trusts someone. Dr. Min says we should all be vigilant. Miriam's hands stilled on the tiny baby clothes she'd been folding. Dr. Min says, of course. The doctor had positioned herself perfectly. The voice of reason, the protector of the vulnerable children, the medical professional everyone should listen to. And Miriam was the outsider, the stranger, the easy scapegoat. That evening, when she went to check on the twins during their bedtime routine, supervised by Mrs. Kang, who stood in the corner like a particularly judgmental statue, Yuna reached for her with both arms, making the soft cooing sounds that meant she wanted to be held. I don't think that's appropriate right now, Mrs. Kang said quietly. The words were a knife between ribs. Miriam watched as Yuna's face crumpled with confusion, watched as the baby who'd slept peacefully in her arms just 2 nights ago was denied that comfort for reasons she couldn't possibly understand. "She needs me," Miriam whispered, tears burning behind her eyes. "What she needs is safety," Mrs. Kang replied, but there was something in her voice. Regret, maybe, or doubt. "I'm sorry, Ms. Caldwell. I truly am. But until this is resolved..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Miriam left the nursery with Yuna's confused cries following her down the hallway, each sound a small death. She made it to her room before the tears came, great heaving sobs that she muffled with her pillow because she didn't want anyone to hear, didn't want to give them more ammunition. She'd been in this house less than a week, and already everything was falling apart. A soft knock on her door made her freeze. She waited, not answering, hoping whoever it was would go away. Instead, a piece of paper slid under the door, white against the dark wood. Miriam stared at it for a long moment before finally getting up to retrieve it. The handwriting was familiar now, that same precise medical script. "Trust is like medicine. The right dose heals, the wrong dose destroys. You're the wrong dose, Ms. Caldwell, and tomorrow, everyone will know it." The morning arrived with the kind of oppressive humidity that made breathing feel like work. Miriam had spent the night in a chair by her window, watching the coastal fog roll in and out like the tide, the threatening note clutched in her trembling hands. She'd memorized every word, every loop of that precise handwriting, trying to decode what "tomorrow, everyone will know it" could possibly mean. Tomorrow was now today. She dressed mechanically, her movements automatic, and made her way to the kitchen where breakfast was being prepared. The usual morning sounds felt muted, as if the entire house was holding its breath. Staff members who normally greeted her with polite nods now looked away entirely, their discomfort palpable in the space between their bodies and hers. Mrs. Kang appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn in a way that made Miriam's stomach clench with premature dread. "Ms. Caldwell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. SEO has requested your presence in his study. Immediately. Dr. Min is already there." The walk through the mansion's corridors felt like moving through water, each step requiring more effort than the last. Miriam's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the one before. What had been fabricated now? What new evidence had mysteriously appeared to condemn her? The study door was partially open, and through it Miriam could hear voices. Guanho's low and controlled, Seolhwa's higher and somehow both concerned and triumphant. She paused just outside, her hand raised to knock, when she heard her own name. Miriam Caldwell's background check was thorough, but there are always things that don't appear on official documents, Seolhwa was saying, her tone careful, measured. Emotional instabilities, personal traumas that might affect judgment. I took the liberty of doing some additional research, and what I found is concerning. Miriam's blood turned to ice. Her personal history, the parts she'd buried, the reasons she'd fled Georgia with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate need to become someone new. What kind of concerns? Guanho's voice was tight. Papers rustled. 7 months ago, Miss Caldwell experienced a significant loss, a pregnancy that ended tragically. The medical records I obtained, with proper authorization, of course, show she was hospitalized briefly afterward for what the American doctors called acute psychological distress. Some might call it a breakdown. The words hit Miriam like physical blows. Her knees nearly buckled. That Seolhwa had somehow accessed her private medical records, had violated the most painful chapter of her life, and was now using it as a weapon, felt like a cruelty beyond comprehension. "I'm not sharing this to be cruel," Seolhwa continued, her voice dripping with false compassion. "But we must consider a woman who lost her own child, now suddenly caring for newborns who aren't hers. The psychological complexities are significant. Attachment issues, projection, perhaps even unconscious resentment that manifests in subtle forms of harm. You're suggesting she would hurt my daughters because she lost her own baby?" Guanho's voice carried a note of disbelief. "I'm suggesting that grief does strange things to people, that unprocessed trauma creates unpredictable behavior, and that we have a responsibility to consider all possibilities when children's safety is at stake." Seolhwa paused, letting her words sink in. The supplement bottles in her room, the unlocked cabinet, Yuna's mysterious illness, and now this history of psychological instability. Mr. Seo, I know you want to believe in her, but the evidence is forming a very clear picture. Miriam couldn't listen anymore. She pushed the door open fully, not caring that her eyes were already wet with tears she hadn't given permission to fall. Both Guanho and Seolhwa turned to face her, surprise on one face, calculated satisfaction on the other. You had no right, Miriam said, her voice shaking but clear. No right to access my medical records. No right to weaponize my grief. No right to stand there and pretend you're protecting anyone when all you're doing is destroying the one person who actually cares about those babies. Seolhwa's expression shifted into something that might have been sympathy if her eyes hadn't been so cold. Ms. Caldwell, I understand you're upset, but no. The word came out sharp as broken glass. You don't get to do that. You don't get to violate my privacy, twist my pain into evidence of guilt, and then tell me you understand. You don't understand anything about me. Then help me understand, Guanho said quietly, and Miriam turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Tell me your side. Tell me what really happened. It was a trap. It had to be a trap. Anything she said could be twisted, used against her. But looking at Guanho's face, at the genuine confusion and conflict written in the lines around his eyes, Miriam realized she had nothing left to lose. The truth was all she had, however insufficient it might be. Yes, I lost a baby, she said, each word costing her something she couldn't name. At 7 months. A daughter. We'd already named her, already painted the nursery, already built a life around her existence. And then one day my body just stopped keeping her safe. The doctors said it was a rare complication, nothing anyone could have predicted or prevented, but it felt like failure, like my body had betrayed both of us. Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward, needing to finish now that she'd started. My husband couldn't look at me afterward, couldn't stand to be in the same room with my grief. The marriage ended 3 months later. I lost everything. My daughter, my husband, my home, my entire future, in the space of half a year. So yes, I had a breakdown. Yes, I was hospitalized. And yes, I ran halfway across the world to escape the ghost of who I used to be. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Seolhwa seemed momentarily at a loss for words. But none of that, Miriam continued, her voice gaining strength. None of that means I would ever harm a child. It means the exact opposite. It means I know exactly how precious and fragile life is. It means I would protect Yeren and Yuna with everything I have, because I know what it's like to lose someone you'd die for. Dr. Min wants you to see my grief as a weakness, as evidence of instability. But grief isn't weakness. Grief is love with nowhere to go, and I have so much love with nowhere to go. The last words came out as barely a whisper, and Miriam realized she was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. Let them see. Let them witness exactly how broken and honest she was. Guanho stood frozen, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. For a moment, Miriam thought she saw understanding in his eyes, maybe even the beginning of trust rebuilt. But then Seolhwa moved, subtle as a snake, placing a hand on his arm. Mr. Seo, she said gently, I know this is difficult. Ms. Caldwell's pain is real. I don't doubt that. But pain doesn't equal innocence. And we still have unexplained evidence that points to serious concerns about her judgment and actions. She walked to Guanho's desk and picked up a folder Miriam hadn't noticed before, opening it with theatrical precision. This morning, security completed their full review of footage from the past week. What they found, well, perhaps you should see for yourself. She pulled out several printed photographs, laying them across the desk like cards in a poker game where the stakes were Miriam's entire life. Even from where she stood, Miriam could see they were security camera images. Grainy, but clear enough. Her stomach dropped as she recognized herself in each one. This is you, Ms. Caldwell, at 11:47 p.m. 3 nights ago, in the hallway outside the nursery, Seolhwa narrated, pointing to the first image. This is you at 2:33 a.m. 2 nights ago, entering the medical supply room. This is you yesterday afternoon in the medication storage area. And this, she tapped the final photo with one manicured nail, is you at 3:15 a.m. last night, standing outside Mr. Seo's study door. Miriam stared at the images, her mind reeling. Yes, she'd been in those places. Yes, those were her. But the context, the innocent, explainable context, was completely absent. She'd gone to the nursery hallway because she'd heard one of the babies cry. She'd entered the medical supply room to get more diapers because Mrs. Kang had asked her to. She'd been near medication storage only because it was next to the laundry room. And last night, she'd walked past Guanho's study on her way to get water from the kitchen. But laid out like this, stripped of context, it looked damning. It looked like someone systematically casing the mansion, planning something terrible. I can explain every single one of those, Miriam started, but Seolhwa cut her off smoothly. I'm sure you can. People with things to hide always have explanations ready. But Mr. Seo, look at the pattern. Look at the timing. This woman has been in every sensitive area of your home, at hours when she should have been sleeping, always alone, always without witnesses. Combined with her psychological history and the physical evidence we've already found, what conclusion are we supposed to draw? Guanho's hands were flat on his desk, his knuckles white with pressure. When he finally looked up at Miriam, his eyes held something that made her want to disappear. Not anger, not even suspicion anymore, but resigned finality. The look of someone who'd made a decision he didn't want to make, but saw no alternative to. Ms. Caldwell, he said, and his voice was so tired it broke her heart. I want to believe you. Some part of me does believe you, but I can't, I won't, risk my daughter's safety on belief alone. Not when there's this much evidence suggesting that having you here puts them in danger. You're firing me. It wasn't a question. I'm asking you to leave, he corrected, as if the distinction mattered. Today, now. I'll provide generous severance, help with your visa situation, references for future employment if you need them. But you cannot stay in this house. The room tilted slightly. Miriam gripped the back of a chair to steady herself, her entire world collapsing into this single moment of rejection. She'd known it was coming. The note had warned her, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. The babies, she whispered. Let me at least say goodbye to... No, the word was firm, final. I think clean breaks are better. For everyone. Clean breaks. As if love and attachment could be severed without blood. As if Yeren and Yuna wouldn't wonder where she'd gone. Why the person who'd finally helped them sleep peacefully had suddenly vanished like their mother before her. Miriam looked at Seolhwa, at the doctor's face arranged in an expression of regretful professionalism that didn't quite reach her eyes. In those eyes, Miriam saw the truth, saw the satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly, of a threat eliminated efficiently, and she understood with sudden, crushing clarity that this had been orchestrated from the beginning. Every piece of evidence, every convenient gap in footage, every perfectly timed incident. Seolhwa had built this trap methodically, and Miriam had walked into it exactly as planned. You win, Miriam said quietly, speaking directly to the doctor. Whatever game you're playing, whatever you want, you win. Seolhwa's smile was thin and cold. This isn't about winning, Ms. Caldwell. It's about protecting innocent children from potential harm. I'm simply doing my job. Miriam turned back to Guanho one final time. When you figure out what's really happening here, and you will, eventually, I hope it's not too late. I hope your daughters are still safe. I hope whoever is actually threatening them hasn't already won. She walked out of the study with her head high and her heart in pieces, each step away from that room feeling like a small death. Mrs. Kang was waiting in the hallway, her face etched with what looked like genuine regret. Your belongings are already packed, she said softly. A car is waiting. I'm sorry, Ms. Caldwell, truly. Are you? Miriam asked, too exhausted for politeness. Or are you just relieved that the problem is leaving quietly? Mrs. Kang had no answer for that. The last thing Miriam heard as she left Seo Guanho's mansion was the sound she'd worked so hard to silence. Yeren and Yuna, crying in perfect, heartbroken harmony, their voices carrying through the expensive walls like a prophecy of everything about to go terribly, irrevocably wrong. The rain came down in sheets as Miriam walked through Tongyong's narrow streets, her single suitcase growing heavier with each step. The small boarding house where she'd stayed her first night in Korea loomed ahead like a monument to failure. She was right back where she'd started, except now she carried the weight of hope gained and brutally lost. The landlady, Mrs. O, recognized her immediately and asked no questions, simply handing over a key to the same small room, with its view of nothing but gray sky and grayer sea. Miriam climbed the stairs slowly, her body moving on autopilot, while her mind replayed every moment of the past week, searching for the point where she could have done something differently, could have protected herself better. She found no such moment. The trap had been perfect, because it was designed by someone who understood exactly how to exploit her vulnerabilities. Her foreignness, her grief, her desperate need to belong somewhere. Night fell with the kind of darkness that felt personal, and Miriam lay on the narrow bed staring at water stains on the ceiling, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Somewhere across the city, Yeren and Yuna were crying. She knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. They were crying, and no one could comfort them, and it was killing something inside Guanho that he'd never get back. She must have eventually slept, because she woke to pounding on her door and weak sunlight struggling through the window. Miriam opened the door to find Mrs. O, her face creased with concern. "Phone call for you," the landlady said in halting English. "Downstairs," says urgent. Who even knew she was here? Miriam followed Mrs. O down to the small office, where an ancient telephone sat off the hook. She picked it up cautiously. "Ms. Caldwell?" The voice was young, male, speaking English with a Korean accent she recognized from the mansion. "This is Jin Woo. I work security at Mr. Seo's house. We've never formally met, but I need to tell you something. Something wrong is happening here." Miriam's heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "The security footage," Jinwoo said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "The images Dr. Min showed Mr. Seo. I was the one who pulled them from the system. But she told me which timestamps to print. She gave me specific times, said she needed documentation for a safety review. I didn't question it because she's a doctor, you know? Authority. I don't understand what you're saying." "The footage is real," he continued, "but it's incomplete. Dr. Min only showed the images that made you look suspicious. She didn't show what came before or after, like that image of you outside the nursery at 11:47 p.m. The full video shows Mrs. Kang sent you there to check on a noise. The medical supply room? You were getting supplies Mrs. Kang requested, and she was right there with you for most of it, just out of frame. Every single image has context that completely changes what it looks like." Miriam sank into the chair beside the desk, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because last night I couldn't sleep, so I reviewed more footage. The gaps, the times when cameras went offline. They weren't random technical failures. Someone accessed the security system remotely and disabled specific cameras at specific times. I thought maybe it was a hacking attempt, so I traced the access codes." He paused, and Miriam could hear him breathing hard, as if he'd been running. "Ms. Caldwell, the codes used to disable those cameras belong to Dr. Min's personal login. She's had administrative access to our security system for months. Mr. Seo gave it to her after his wife passed away. Said he trusted her completely. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. She's been setting me up from the beginning." "I think so. And I think..." Jinwoo's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I think whatever she's planning isn't finished. Last night after you left, she volunteered to stay overnight to monitor the babies. Said they were too distressed and needed medical supervision. Mr. Seo agreed because he's exhausted and desperate, and she's positioned herself as the only person he can trust. But Ms. Caldwell, when I was reviewing footage this morning, I saw her in the medication room at 3 a.m., alone, handling the same supplement bottles that started this whole investigation." Fear coursed through Miriam's veins like ice water. "Where's Mr. Seo now?" "He left early this morning for a business meeting in Seoul. Won't be back until late tonight. The doctor knows this. She's alone in that house with the babies and a skeleton staff who all think you were the threat." Miriam stood abruptly, her mind racing. "You have to show him the full footage. You have to tell him what you found. I tried calling him. He's in meetings, not taking calls. I left messages, but..." Jinwoo sounded young suddenly, scared. "I don't know if he'll listen to security staff questioning the doctor he trusts. I don't know if anyone will believe me without more proof. But you knew something was wrong from the start. You tried to warn him. And look how well that worked," Miriam said bitterly. "Please," Jinwoo said, desperation clear in his voice. "Those babies need someone who actually cares about them, not someone using them for whatever Dr. Min is using them for. I don't know her endgame, but I know it's not good. You have to come back. I was expelled from that house. If I show up, I'll be arrested for trespassing. Then don't come to the house. Come to the security office. It's a separate building near the service entrance, I'll show you everything I found. We can document it, send it to Mr. SEO, make him see the truth before it's too late. Miriam looked out the window at the gray morning, at the city that had promised her a fresh start and delivered only new variations of old pain. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to stay away from the mansion and the doctor who'd so thoroughly destroyed her credibility. Going back would likely end with her in a Korean jail cell or on a plane back to America. But then she thought of Yaren's tiny fingers wrapping around her thumb, Yuna's soft breathing as she finally fell asleep after months of insomnia. The way both babies had looked at her with trust so complete it was almost holy. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said. The security office was exactly where Jinwoo said it would be. A small concrete building tucked behind the main house. Easy to miss if you didn't know it existed. Jinwoo met her at the door, a young man in his mid-20s with nervous energy radiating from every pore. "Thank you for coming," he said, ushering her inside quickly. "I wasn't sure you would. Show me what you found." The security room was lined with monitors showing different angles of the mansion and grounds. Jinwoo pulled up files on the main computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Here, this is the footage from 3 nights ago that Dr. Min said showed you acting suspiciously." He played the video at normal speed, and Miriam watched herself walk down the hallway, pause outside the nursery door, listen for a moment, then continue on. Completely innocent, completely explainable. Now here's what she showed Mr. Seo. Jinwoo pulled up the printed timestamp image. It was the same moment, but frozen at the exact second when Miriam was standing still, her body language in that single frame suggesting someone lurking rather than someone responding to instructions. "It's the same footage," Miriam breathed, "but completely different stories depending on what you show." "Exactly. And here," Jinwoo pulled up another file. "This is the log of security system access for the past 2 weeks. See these entries? All Dr. Min's login, all at times when cameras mysteriously went offline. She's been creating blind spots in coverage systematically." Miriam studied the screen, her mind working through implications. But why? What does she gain from framing me? From having unlimited, unsupervised access to the babies? "I don't know," Jinwoo admitted. "But I found something else. Something that scared me enough to call you." He pulled up financial records that he clearly shouldn't have had access to. "Dr. Min has been receiving payments from Mr. SEO beyond her normal medical fees. Large payments coded as special services for infant care. They started right after Mrs. SEO passed away and have been increasing monthly. The most recent was 3 days ago, the same day you were hired as primary caregiver." "How much?" Jinwoo turned the screen toward her. The number made Miriam's stomach drop. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, paid over 5 months to a doctor who was supposedly just providing pediatric checkups. "That's not medical care money," Miriam said slowly. "That's something else entirely. That's—" She stopped, a horrible thought forming. "Jinwoo, what exactly happened to Mrs. Seo? How did she pass away?" The young man's face went pale. "Complications from childbirth. Emergency surgery that went wrong. Dr. Min was the attending physician. She said they did everything they could. That sometimes bodies just fail. Mr. SEO was destroyed. He blamed himself for not getting her better medical care, even though Dr. Min is supposedly one of the best in the region." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. A doctor present at a death that left a wealthy man vulnerable and grief-stricken. Babies who couldn't sleep, who cried endlessly. Symptoms that could be caused by a dozen things, including medication deliberately designed to cause distress. A foreign caregiver brought in and immediately framed when she proved too effective, too close to discovering something wrong. "Oh my God," Miriam whispered. "She's been keeping them sick, keeping them dependent on her special care so she can keep billing him, keep controlling the household. I made them better, so I had to go." "But that's insane," Jinwoo protested. "Why would a doctor deliberately hurt children just for money? Not just money, control, access. She's positioned herself as indispensable to this family, and if anyone threatens that position..." Miriam trailed off, her blood running cold as another thought struck her. "Jinwoo, where's Dr. Min right now?" He checked the monitors, cycling through camera feeds. "I don't see her in any of the common areas." "Let me check the nursery feed." He pulled up the camera, then frowned. "That's strange. The nursery camera is showing offline. It was working 10 minutes ago." They looked at each other, the the same terrible understanding dawning simultaneously. "She's alone with them," Miriam said, already moving toward the door. "She knows Guanho is gone, knows the staff thinks I was the threat, knows she has hours before anyone checks on her. Whatever she's planning to do. We have to stop her," Jinwoo finished, grabbing his phone. "I'll call the police." "There's no time." Miriam was already running across the grounds toward the main house, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Behind her, she heard Jinwoo shouting into his phone in rapid Korean, his footsteps following hers. The service entrance was unlocked. Miriam burst through it, not caring about alarms or consequences, taking the stairs 2 at a time toward the nursery wing. The house was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Where was the staff? Where was Mrs. Kang? She reached the nursery door and found it closed, locked from inside. "Dr. Min!" Miriam pounded on the door. "Dr. Min, open this door." No response. Just silence that felt wrong, heavy with terrible possibility. Jinwoo arrived behind her, breathing hard. "I called the police. They're coming." "But Ms. Caldwell, we can't just break in." "Watch me." Miriam threw her full weight against the door. Once, twice. On the third impact, the lock gave way and the door flew open. The scene inside made her blood freeze. Dr. Min Seol-hwa stood over Yuna's crib, a syringe in her hand, her face carved from ice. The babies were silent, not peacefully asleep, but unconscious in a way that looked wrong. "You," Seol-hwa breathed, her composure finally cracking. "You just couldn't stay away, could you?" Time seemed to fracture into fragments. Miriam launching herself across the nursery. Seol-hwa's surprised cry. The syringe clattering to the floor. Jinwoo shouting into his phone. Miriam reached Yuna's crib first, her hands trembling as she checked the baby's breathing. Shallow but present. Alive. Thank God, alive. "They're just sedated," Seol-hwa said coldly, straightening her coat with shaking hands, trying to reclaim some dignity, even as her carefully constructed world collapsed around her. "A mild dose. Perfectly safe. I'm a doctor, for God's sake. I know what I'm doing. Sedating infants without parental consent?" Miriam's voice was raw with fury and fear. "That's your defense?" Jinwoo had moved to block the door, his phone still pressed to his ear, speaking rapidly to what Miriam hoped was the police. Seol-hwa looked between them, her expression cycling through emotions too fast to track. Anger, fear, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like resignation. "You don't understand," she said, and for the first time, her voice carried genuine emotion beneath the clinical veneer. "You couldn't possibly understand what it's like. I dedicated my entire life to medicine. 20 years of study, of sacrifice, of being the best. And for what? To watch less qualified doctors get positions because they had the right connections, the right family names. To be passed over again and again because I didn't fit their image of what a successful physician should be. So you decided to create your own success?" Miriam kept her body between Seol-hwa and the cribs, her protective instincts screaming. "By making these babies sick? By keeping them dependent on you? I kept them comfortable." Seol-hwa's composure finally shattered completely, her voice rising. "Do you know what it's like when twins are born premature? When their mother passes away from complications? When everyone expects them to fail? I was there. I kept them alive when everyone else had given up. I earned my place in this family by administering medications they didn't need," Jinwoo interjected, his phone call apparently finished. "By creating symptoms that required your special care. By making yourself indispensable through deception." Seol-hwa's laugh was bitter, broken. Guanho was drowning in grief. The babies were crying endlessly. That part was real, that wasn't me. They were mourning their mother in the only way infants can. I simply maintained their dependence, made sure he needed me, made sure he paid for that need. "You took advantage of a grieving man and 2 innocent children," Miriam said, her voice shaking with rage. "You framed me to protect your scheme. You destroyed my reputation, my livelihood, my sense of safety, all to keep your position secure. You were going to ruin everything." Seol-hwa's eyes blazed. One night, and suddenly they're sleeping peacefully. Suddenly Guanho is looking at you like you're some kind of miracle worker. Do you know how long it took me to build his dependency? How carefully I had to calibrate everything? And you just walked in with your tragic backstory and your natural maternal instinct and undid months of work. The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Jinwoo's face had gone pale, and Miriam felt sick to her stomach. This woman, this educated, successful, respected doctor, had deliberately harmed children out of ego and greed. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Seolhwa heard them too, her body tensing like a trapped animal. "They won't believe you," she said desperately. "My reputation is impeccable. I'm a respected physician. You're a foreign worker with a history of psychological problems. Who do you think they'll believe?" "They'll believe the evidence," Jinwoo said, holding up his phone. "I've been recording this entire conversation, and I've sent copies of all the security footage and financial records to the police, to Mr. SEO, and to the Korean Medical Board. Your reputation is finished, Dr. Min." The sound that came from Seolhwa was inhuman. Rage and despair and disbelief twisted into something that made Miriam's skin crawl. But before anyone could move, heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs, and police officers burst into the nursery, weapons drawn, shouting commands in Korean. Everything became chaos. Officers securing Seolhwa, who went rigid and silent, her face empty of everything except cold defeat. Paramedics arriving to check the babies, their gentle hands examining tiny bodies while Miriam hovered nearby, unable to step away, unable to stop protecting them, even though the immediate danger had passed. And then, cutting through the noise and confusion, a voice Miriam recognized. "Where are my daughters? Someone tell me where my daughters are." Guan-ho appeared in the doorway, his face carved from pure terror, his expensive suit rumpled like he'd been running. His eyes swept the room. The police, the paramedics, Seolhwa in handcuffs, Jinwoo looking shell-shocked, and finally Miriam, standing guard over the cribs like an avenging angel. "What?" he started, but couldn't finish, the words dying in his throat as he took in the scene. "Your daughters are safe," one of the paramedics said in English, recognizing him. "Sedated, but safe. We're monitoring them now, but their vital signs are stable." Guan-ho moved toward the cribs on unsteady legs, and Miriam stepped aside to let him pass, watching as he looked down at Yerin and Yuna, with an expression of such profound relief and guilt it was painful to witness. He reached out with trembling hands to touch each baby's face, tears streaming down his own without shame or restraint. "I'm sorry," he whispered, whether to his daughters or to some higher power or to his deceased wife. Miriam couldn't tell. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better. I should have seen." "Mr. Seo," one of the police officers interrupted gently. "We need you to come to the station to give a statement. We've arrested Dr. Min Seolhwa on charges of child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy. But we need your testimony about the financial arrangements and medical care." Guan-ho nodded numbly, unable to look away from his daughters. "Can someone stay with them? I can't leave them alone. Not after—" "I'll stay," Miriam said quietly. He turned to her then, really seeing her for the first time since entering the room. His face crumpled with emotions too complex to name: shame, gratitude, regret, hope. "Ms. Caldwell, you came back. After everything after I expelled you, accused you, doubted you, you still came back." "I didn't come back for you," Miriam said honestly. "I came back for them." The words could have been cruel, but somehow they weren't. They were just truth, pure and simple. And Guan-ho received them like the punishment he knew he deserved. "I understand," he said hoarsely, "and I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But please stay with them while I handle this. I'll have Mrs. Kang come as soon as possible. But until then—" "I said I'll stay," Miriam interrupted. "You don't have to beg. Just go. Do what you need to do. We'll be here when you get back." The police escorted both Guan-ho and Seolhwa out, the doctor maintaining her stony silence, while Guan-ho kept looking back at the nursery, as if afraid it might disappear if he took his eyes off it. Jinwoo gave Miriam an encouraging nod before following to provide his evidence and testimony. And then, finally, it was quiet. Just Miriam, two paramedics who were packing up their equipment, and the twins, sleeping off sedation that never should have been administered. The paramedics assured her the babies would wake naturally within a few hours, showed her what signs to watch for, and left their contact information in case of any concerns. Then they too were gone, and Miriam was alone with Yerin and Yuna in the nursery. that had been the stage for so much deception and pain. She pulled a chair between the two cribs and sat down, placing one hand on each baby's chest to feel the rise and fall of breathing. Alive. Safe. Finally. Actually safe. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky outside the windows, painting the nursery in shades of amber and gold. Miriam didn't move except to adjust her position occasionally, maintaining her vigil with the dedication of someone who'd lost too much to ever take safety for granted again. When Yuna's eyes finally fluttered open, unfocused and confused, Miriam was there immediately, scooping her up gently, murmuring soft reassurances. The baby blinked slowly, her small face scrunching up as if about to cry, but then she focused on Miriam's face and something shifted. Recognition, relief, trust. "Hey, sweet girl," Miriam whispered, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm here. I'm right here. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." Yuna made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a coo, and nestled into Miriam's chest as if she belonged there, as if she'd never doubted she would end up back in these arms. Yeren woke shortly after, and Miriam held them both, one in each arm, rocking gently and humming that wordless melody her own mother had once hummed. The babies relaxed into her embrace, their breathing evening out, their tiny bodies trusting her completely. That's how Guanho found them 3 hours later when he returned from the police station. Miriam in the rocking chair with both twins asleep in her arms, her head tilted back against the chair, her own eyes closed but not sleeping, just existing in this moment of peace, hard-won and precious beyond measure. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching, his face working through emotions he didn't try to hide. When Miriam finally sensed his presence and opened her eyes, they looked at each other across the nursery with understanding that needed no words. "The police have everything they need," Guanho said quietly, moving into the room slowly, as if afraid sudden movements might shatter the fragile peace. Dr. Min confessed to most of it once she realized the evidence was overwhelming. She'll face criminal charges. The medical board has already suspended her license pending investigation. "Good," Miriam said simply. "Jinwoo showed me all the footage, the real footage, with full context, and the financial records, and," his voice cracked, "and the medical analysis suggesting the babies were being given unnecessary medications designed to disrupt their sleep patterns. All of it. Everything she did. Everything I was too blind and stupid and desperate to see." "You weren't stupid," Miriam said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "You were grieving. She exploited that. That's not your fault. But I blamed you. I expelled you. I chose to believe her lies over your truth because it was easier than admitting I'd let a monster into my home." He moved closer, kneeling beside the rocking chair so they were at eye level. "Ms. Caldwell, Miriam, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I have no right to ask you for anything ever again, but I'm asking anyway, because my daughters need you, not as an employee, not as hired help, as someone who genuinely cares about them, as family." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and terror in equal measure. "I'm not family," Miriam said quietly. "I'm just someone who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No," Guanho's voice was firm. "You're someone who came back even after being hurt. Someone who put yourself at risk to protect children who aren't even yours. Someone who sees my daughters not as a job or an obligation, but as precious souls deserving of love and safety. That's not random chance. That's who you are." Yuna stirred in Miriam's arms, her small mouth forming around sounds that weren't quite words, but carried intention. She looked up at Miriam with those enormous dark eyes, and then, clear as a bell, formed a sound that made both adults freeze. Ma, the Korean word for mother. Imperfect, baby-formed, but unmistakable in its meaning. Miriam felt something crack open in her chest, that sealed-off place where she'd buried her grief and her hope and her capacity to love without reservation. Tears spilled down her cheeks unchecked as she looked down at this child who wasn't hers by blood, but felt like hers in every way that mattered. "I can't promise I won't fail them," she whispered. "I can't promise I'll always know what to do or say the right thing, or be enough." "None of us can promise that," Guanho replied. "But you can promise to try, to stay, To be here even when it's hard. That's all family is, really. Showing up day after day, choosing to stay. Miriam looked at him, really looked, and saw past the wealth and power and reputation to the broken man underneath. The father who'd lost his wife and nearly lost his daughters, and was now desperately trying to rebuild something true from the rubble. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to know this isn't just gratitude or guilt or desperation talking. I need to know that tomorrow, next week, next month, you'll still want me here when the crisis has passed and normal life returns." "Then take time," Guanho said immediately. "Take all the time you need. But please, take it here. In this house. With these girls who've already claimed you as theirs." As if to punctuate his words, Yaren's eyes opened, and she too looked at Miriam and formed that same sound. Omma. And Miriam, who'd thought she'd never hear that word directed at her, who'd buried the dream of motherhood along with so many other dreams, felt herself begin to believe in impossible things again. 3 months had passed since the day everything broke open and truth emerged from shadows. 3 months of gradual healing, of trust rebuilt brick by careful brick, of learning what family meant when it wasn't defined by blood or obligation, but by choice renewed every single day. Miriam had taken Guanho's offer. Not immediately, not without conditions, but eventually. She'd moved back into the mansion, not into her old room but into a proper suite in the family wing, a space that acknowledged she was something more than staff, but gave her the autonomy to define what that more meant on her own terms. The distinction mattered to her, and Guanho understood without needing lengthy explanations. The household had transformed in those months. Mrs. Kang, horrified to learn how thoroughly Silwa had manipulated everyone, had personally overseen a complete restructuring of protocols and staff training. Jin Woo had been promoted to head of security, his initiative and integrity rewarded with responsibility and trust. New cameras with transparent access logs now monitored every corner, not to create suspicion, but to ensure safety through accountability. And the babies had bloomed like flowers finally given proper sunlight. Without the medications that had disrupted their systems, without the underlying tension that grief and deception had created in the house, Yaren and Yuna had begun to thrive. They slept through most nights now, their small bodies finally understanding that rest was safe. That morning would come, that the people caring for them wouldn't disappear. Miriam had been there for all of it, the first full night of uninterrupted sleep. The first real smiles that weren't just gas reflexes, but genuine joy. The first time they'd pulled themselves up to standing, wobbling like tiny drunk sailors before collapsing into giggles. Every milestone, every moment, every mundane miracle of watching children grow. She'd also been there for the hard parts, the nights when old grief surfaced in Guanho's eyes, and he'd retreat to his study for hours, wrestling with guilt over his wife's death, and his own blindness to Seolwa's manipulation. Miriam had learned not to try to fix it, not to offer empty reassurances, but simply to exist nearby, a quiet presence that said without words, "You don't have to carry this alone." Somewhere in those 3 months, in the accumulation of shared moments both ordinary and profound, something had shifted between them. Not dramatically, not with grand declarations or cinematic gestures, but gradually, like seasons changing, imperceptible from day to day, but undeniable when you looked back at where you'd started. Now, on a crisp November morning with the first hint of winter in the air, Miriam stood in the mansion's garden helping Guanho's staff prepare for the twins' first birthday celebration. The garden had been transformed into something magical, paper lanterns hanging from every tree, their soft glow visible even in daylight, tables laden with traditional Korean rice cakes and modern birthday treats, a small play area set up for the handful of children invited from the local community center. "You've been working since dawn," Guanho's voice came from behind her, warm and slightly amused. "The party doesn't start for 3 hours. Everything is already perfect." Miriam turned to find him watching her with an expression that had become familiar over the past weeks, something tender and wondering, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real and present, and choosing to stay. "Perfect is a moving target when you're trying to celebrate babies who've already survived so much," Miriam replied, adjusting one of the lanterns that hung slightly crooked. "I want this day to be perfect because they deserve perfect." Even if perfect is impossible, you know they won't remember any of this, right? Guanho moved closer, his hand reaching out to still hers on the lantern. They're one. Their memories don't work that way yet. I'll remember it for them, Miriam said softly. Someday when they're older and they ask about their first birthday, I want to be able to tell them every detail. I want them to know that they were celebrated, that they were loved, that their existence in this world mattered enough for people to hang hundreds of lanterns and bake special cakes and gather together just to honor them being alive. Guanho's fingers tightened around hers, and when she looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. You give them something I can't, he said quietly, this certainty that they're worthy of celebration just for existing. I love them desperately, but my love is always tangled up with grief and guilt and fear of failing them again. Your love is cleaner, purer, just love, without all the complicated weight I carry. That's not true, Miriam protested. My love is just as complicated. It's wrapped up in my own grief, my own loss, my own fear that I'll wake up one day and this will all have been a dream. I'm not some perfect maternal figure, Guanho. I'm just as broken as you are. Maybe that's why it works, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. Maybe we don't need perfect. Maybe we just need two broken people choosing to build something new from the pieces. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. They'd been dancing around this for weeks now, the way conversations lasted longer than necessary, the way hands brushed when passing babies back and forth, the way comfortable silences had become their own form of communication. But neither had named it, too afraid perhaps that speaking it aloud would give it power to hurt them. Guanho, Miriam started, but was interrupted by delighted squeals from inside the house. They both turned to see Mrs. Kang emerging with the twins, both girls dressed in traditional Korean hanbok dresses, tiny, elaborate garments in pink and gold that made them look like little princesses from a storybook. Yeren spotted Miriam first and immediately reached out, her entire body straining toward the woman she'd learned to call Alma, with increasing confidence. Someone's excited to see you, Mrs. Kang said with a knowing smile, carefully handing Yeren over while Guanho scooped up Yuna. Miriam buried her face in Yeren's soft hair, breathing in the baby soap and sunshine smell that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Look at you in your fancy dress, she murmured. You're so beautiful. Both of you are so beautiful. They take after their mother, Guanho said softly, a note of old pain in his voice that had softened over time from sharp grief to gentle remembrance. She would have loved this. Would have loved seeing them so healthy and happy. Would have loved. He paused, his eyes meeting Miriam's over the twins' heads. Would have loved knowing they found someone who cares for them the way you do. It was the first time he'd spoken of his late wife's potential approval of Miriam's presence, and the words landed with unexpected weight. Miriam had been so careful not to try to replace the woman who'd given birth to these children, so conscious of being respectful to a memory she'd never known personally. Hearing that Guanho believed his wife would have approved felt like permission she hadn't known she'd been waiting for. The party began shortly after, and it was exactly the kind of perfect chaos that comes with celebrating one-year-olds. Babies crawled everywhere. Toddlers from the community center ran shrieking through the garden. Adults laughed and chatted while keeping watchful eyes on small humans who seemed determined to find creative ways to injure themselves. Yeren and Yuna, the guests of honor, presided over it all with the regal obliviousness of tiny queens who had no idea what a birthday meant, but were thoroughly enjoying being the center of attention. They smashed their first taste of rice cake with enthusiastic destruction, got frosting in their hair and on their fancy dresses, and laughed with such pure, unfiltered joy that every adult present felt their hearts expand. But the moment that would stay with Miriam forever came later, when the afternoon sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, and most guests had departed. The four of them, Guanho, Miriam, and the twins, sat together on a blanket in the garden, surrounded by the gentle glow of lanterns that had been lit as dusk approached. Yuna was dozing against Guanho's chest, exhausted from excitement and sugar. Yeren was still alert, playing with Miriam's fingers, babbling in the nonsense language of almost words that somehow communicated perfectly. The air smelled of autumn leaves and birthday cake and possibility. I've been thinking, Guanho said into the comfortable silence, his voice careful, about what we talked about this morning, about building something new from broken pieces. Miriam's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. And what conclusion did you reach? that I want to try. He shifted Yuna carefully so he could look at Miriam directly. Not because I'm desperate or grateful or trying to fill a hole left by loss, but because over these past 3 months, I've watched you transform this house from a mausoleum of grief into an actual home. I've watched you love my daughters with a fierceness that has nothing to do with obligation. And I've felt myself beginning to believe in things I thought I'd buried with my wife. Hope, future, the possibility that broken doesn't mean finished. Miriam felt tears prick her eyes, but didn't look away from his gaze. This isn't about replacing her, she said, needing him to understand. I could never. I know, he interrupted gently. You're not replacing anything. You're creating something entirely new, something that honors what was while being brave enough to imagine what could be. He paused, then continued with devastating honesty. I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Miriam. I'm offering you reality. Messy, complicated, sometimes painful reality, but reality where you're chosen every day, where these girls have someone who sees them not as a job or a duty, but as the miracles they are. Where I have a partner who understands that grief doesn't disappear, it just makes room for other emotions to exist alongside it. That's all I've ever wanted, Miriam whispered. Not perfection, just presence, just choice, just someone willing to stay even when it's hard. Guanho reached across the blanket, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining while each held a sleeping or drowsy child with their other arm. Then stay, he said simply. Not as an employee, not as a caregiver, as family, as my partner in raising these beautiful girls, as someone I'm choosing to walk beside, for however long you'll let me. Miriam looked down at Yeren, who had finally succumbed to sleep against her shoulder, then at Yuna nestled peacefully against Guanho's chest, then at the man himself, this complicated, grieving, hopeful person who'd learned to trust again despite every reason not to. She thought about the baby she'd lost, the life she'd buried in Georgia, the grief that had brought her halfway around the world to a country where nothing made sense. She thought about how pain had led her here, to this garden, to these children, to this moment where broken pieces were rearranging themselves into something that resembled wholeness. I can walk beside you, she said finally, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. I can choose this. I can choose you, and them, and this beautiful, complicated, imperfect family we're building from scratch. The relief and joy that flooded Guanho's features was almost painful to witness. He leaned forward carefully, mindful of the sleeping children between them, and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture of intimacy and promise that needed no words. Thank you, he breathed, for coming back, for staying, for believing we were worth the risk. Around them, lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing shadows across the garden. Somewhere in the house, Mrs. Kang was probably cleaning up party debris while Jinwoo checked security monitors. Life continued in all its mundane glory, but here, in this moment, wrapped in the glow of paper lanterns and the warmth of chosen family, Miriam felt something she hadn't felt in years. Home. Not a place, but a collection of people who'd decided to show up for each other, day after difficult day, choosing love over fear and hope over resignation. It wasn't the ending she'd imagined when she first arrived in Tongyong with one suitcase and a heart full of running. But it was better than anything she'd dared to hope for. Real, complicated, beautiful in its imperfection. As if sensing the significance of the moment, both twins stirred simultaneously, their eyes opening to look at the adults holding them. Yeren reached up to pat Miriam's cheek. Yuna grabbed Guanho's finger, and in perfect, innocent synchronicity, both girls smiled and murmured their favorite word, Oma, Appa, mother, father, family. Not perfect, but theirs. And that was everything. When a story begins with broken hearts and unanswered cries, we rarely expect it to end with the quiet strength of a new beginning. Yet life often reshapes itself in the spaces where we least expect healing to bloom. What we witnessed here was not perfection, but two souls learning to stand again, guided by the smallest voices who refused to give up on the person who held them gently. It makes us wonder, in a moment of fear and uncertainty, would we choose to walk away, or would we brave the unknown for the sake of those who needed us most? Sometimes the greatest turning points come disguised as fragile moments. A single choice can open a door that pain once kept closed. Ask yourself, If you were in her place, carrying memories that still echo in the dark, would you have found the courage to return? And if you were in his place, burdened by grief and regret, would you have reached out and asked for another chance to try again? In the end, this story reminds us that love is not born from perfection, but from presence, from showing up when everything feels uncertain, from holding on when forgiveness feels too heavy. And perhaps the question that lingers the longest is the simplest one. What would you have done if life placed such a fragile, extraordinary moment in your hands?